because it's time, and I just
Yeah,
have a
of
very,
course.
very slight cough. You'll have to excuse me. I've got a little bit of a cough, but I think I'll get through it. Now, is it live? I think so. Yes. So, hello, and welcome. Today, I'm very excited to welcome Mr. Nick Griffin, formerly of the BNP, probably the most politically successful person of our type that we could possibly speak with. And as you were in the European Union as well.
I was
I'm
in the
not sure
European
what was your
Parliament
title
5
there.
years. Yeah.
Yeah. And now, forgive me, you're Vice President of the Alliance for Peace and Freedom. I'm not even sure what that is.
It's an alliance of all the genuine radical stroke revolutionary stroke Christian nationalists in Europe, basically. So we've got contacts, friends, and parties such as Forza Nuova in Italy in the organisation. It was set up originally directly in connection with the European Union. Although we're all against the European Union, we're of course for a Europe of the nations. And when the European Union, they've got this operation in order to encourage, it's almost bribery really, in order to encourage everyone to get into the pan-European thing, they provided quite significant amounts of funding for pan-European level political parties. Now they'd done this for years, and you had like 3 or 4 different sorts of communist party at the trough. You had everybody getting money, some of them using it for the cause, some of them siphoning off for themselves. But this had happily gone on for decades, vast amounts of taxpayers' money down the drain, until when the first term that I was there, the Front National in particular, now they had Britain as well, they just had the numbers to qualify to set up one of these parties. So the hardline nationalists of Europe, relatively given that the Front National isn't that hardline, the hardline nationalists of Europe got in on this funding as well, and we did quite a lot with it, some really quite good stuff. So they were fairly horrified by this, the European Union. So they changed the rules to make it harder. Right. So this thing was that was shut down. That was identity and tradition. So that was shut down. So then the next time around, it happens every 5 years with the Alliance for Peace and Freedom. We got the funding for that. So I think it was about 600,000 euros or so in the year. And they were so horrified by this, they changed the rules again. You used to have that basically you had to have more and more elected representatives in more and more places in order to qualify. So to shut us out, the irony was that in shutting us out, they shut out 2 or 3 communist parties, 2 or 3 iterations of the Greens, because they were also relatively small parties. So there was some consolation when they shut us out. But the long and the short of that is that without the funding, without any funding at all, it's all from our own pockets. It's a much harder operation to run. So we meet up several times a year. We exchange especially ideas and intelligence, but it's a hard thing to operate at a European level. But that, in a nutshell, is the Alliance for Peace and Freedom.
I see. No, that's very interesting. I didn't know. I'd heard. I wasn't really aware. So you're explicitly Christian in your approach and your angle. And were you? Yes. Was that always a big part of your?
That wasn't the case with the previous iteration, the independence and tradition people, who were just simply European traditionalists and nationalists, not necessarily Christian, but everybody involved in the Alliance for Peace and Freedom, all the organizations are Christian, not necessarily, not preachily so, but they're just coming from, at the very least, a Christian heritage position. You don't have to be a confessing Christian. We've got Catholics, Protestants, Orthodox in Romania, for instance. So it's not some ecumenical Christian thing, but there has to at least be a positive acceptance of the idea that Europe was Christian, that a large part of the greatness of our Europe came in different ways from Christianity, and that it's the way to go.
Yeah, because I didn't recall you ever hearing much of that a religious angle out of you when I would follow you before. Again, I didn't really.
Well, the British National. Yeah, the British National Party, when I was elected to lead it in '99, it had a mix, basically. There were people who were very consciously Nordic pagans and so on. You had some who were Christians, some who didn't give a damn. Britain was at the very end of its extremely agnostic, don't give a damn phase then.
Yeah.
As we began to see that there's actually a serious problem with Islamification, which certainly in England, I was involved in the National Front from the age of 15 in 1974. right through to my early days in the BNP in the 90s, nobody thought for one moment, we never talked about Muslims. Nobody did anywhere in Europe. It wasn't a matter of Muslims, it was the fact they were brown. And we in Britain looked just at, they were all from the Indian subcontinent, and whether they were Muslims, Hindus, Sikhs, we didn't care. They shouldn't be in our country in these numbers. We weren't asked, etc., etc. It was only from the year 2000, really, as I started to campaign more and more in Northern England, really up close and personal with Pakistani communities, began to look at it. And really first in 2001 with 9/11 as well. Partly it's an organic thing, partly it's the moment when the Zionists also started trying to co-opt European nationalism for their aims. And the question of Islam rose higher and higher up, that, hey, this is a thing. The minute you've got a problem with a religious faith like Islam, it becomes, to me anyway, and lots of other nationalists at the time, quite rapidly clear that to take an ideology to a religion is taking a knife to a gunfight. It's a different level altogether. When the threatening ideology in Europe was communism, then the reactive defensive ideology to that were the various fascisms, one ideology against another. When you have a religion, you can't fight a religion with an ideology. You have to move up one. And then at the purely organic level from the people, the more that people see large numbers of Muslims professing their Muslim faith, the most natural reaction for ordinary people who aren't deeply political is, well, if they're Muslims on a block, well, we'll be Christians on a block. And we're behind them on the game. But there's no doubt, I think, you look at the number of young men, especially in Britain, America, I don't know about Ireland, perhaps I think because of the specifically Catholic homosexual paedophile thing, Ireland is behind the curve for everyone else. People are still in the anti-religious phase. All over Europe, more and more elsewhere, young nationalists are becoming Christians.
Yeah, I mean, it's the religious debates rage on, I guess, but I know what you mean. So you might say you approach it almost from a Nietzschean perspective, as in it's a necessary weapon in the battle as much as anything.
I certainly wouldn't say Nietzschean for one moment. No, you can say it's perhaps it could be sociobiology, perhaps it's just pure tactics. To me, it's more than that. I mean, I've got no problem with someone who isn't a Christian. I think they'd be better in the cause, they'd be better in themselves. If you've got a young family, you've got to think my family would be better off in a society which has overall a Christian ethos, as opposed to one which has either an atheistic or an ultra-capitalist materialist ethos. They'd be better. But if someone isn't at that stage yet, it doesn't bother me at all, other than there's a very serious problem amongst the harder line nationalists of the Western world of this, what I would call Azovification, which is a sort of, and partly it comes from England with Myatt and the Order of Nine Angles. This Satanist nationalism is utter poison. As far as I'm concerned, all those people should be put against a wall and shot. Simple as that. So I wouldn't work with any of them. Other than that, if someone's a nationalist and they are a different sort of Christian, personally, I'm very drawn to orthodoxy. If they're a different sort of Christian or no Christian at all, it's not a problem. Yeah.
I didn't mean Nietzschean in that sense. I just meant in the sense that Nietzsche kind of, despite sort of losing his Christianity, he recognized it was necessary, and that he had a sort of sense.
No, I thought you meant in the power sense.
No, not that you were like, not to say you don't have a firm belief of any kind or anything like that. Just that it's not, with people, some people it can be so up front and center, that to people that are a little more agnostic or paganish and this and that, I don't know, it sort of overwhelms everything, and there's decisions made there that are kind of difficult or awkward. But really, what I wanted to talk to you about, two things primarily. I saw a video of yours recently, and both these things you were touching on, but I wanted to get more details out of you. You had an incredibly realist, I thought, perspective, just like brutally realist perspective on the state of the immigration business and the outcome in terms of a bit of a dour outlook on remigration and all this kind of thing. And I'd like you to lay that out again and just pick your brains about that a little bit again, your view regarding
that. Where do you want to start on that? Because already there's a huge subject there. So where do you think
start? So at what point did you, after all the work you did, at what point did you even begin, begin to feel that it was sort of
that's a very good place to start. I was feeling we're very near that point. halfway through my party political career, when I first got involved in the British National Party, as opposed to the National Front with a couple of years gap between the two. So this was in about 1995, and then by 1996, so we're talking 30 years ago, it was clear to me that the demographics were such, and by demographics, an awful lot of nationalists, racialists, or whatever, but when they talk about demographics, they only think in terms of them. It's just their numbers. Yep. Growing,
Yep.
whether it's through immigration or faster birth rates, it's their numbers. It doesn't occur to them that demographics, there's two sides to it. It's every bit about more, in fact, more about our numbers. And the boomer generation, as it passes and then disappears, is going to leave a vast hole in our population, and nothing can be done to stop it. So 30 years ago, in the middle of the 90s, I did a speaking tour around pretty much every British National Party branch in the country, on the road for days. And everyone, in these days, it was great in those days, because there was no such thing as the internet, and really no one had the capacity to film a speech or whatever. You could go around, you could make the same speech day after day after day. You couldn't do it these days, because people saw that 3 weeks ago. Get off, you're boring us. But you make the same speech in every single place, and to them it was new, and you got better and better and better. And it was nice. By the end, well, even by partway through, honestly, it was a blinding speech. And I was saying to them, look, for these demographic reasons, explained them and us. And then you look at democracy, and you don't have to be at the absolute minority to be unable to win, because there'll always be people on your side ethnically, who should be on your tribe, but they're not. They're with the other side, etc., etc. And then you get the ones who think, oh, if we have trouble, I'll lose my house value and all the rest of it. So I was saying, look, we haven't got very long, quite literally. And we've only got 20 to 25 years in which this can be turned around.
And what year was this?
This was in 1996, 30 years ago.
30,
so we've only got 20 to 25 years in which this can be turned around. After that, it's too late. There's no possibility of a democratic political solution. So I'm not saying get out the guns. I'm just saying that in terms of, can this be solved, for instance, by remigration, you have to have state power for that. You have to be able to take state power. You have to be able to keep state power. And if you can't do that, you can talk about it, but it ain't going to happen. It's the child writing a letter to Father Christmas. It's not real. It's childish. So in 1996, I said, look, we've got 25 years. We had to turn this around. We had to get real. So I was saying to the BNP then, look, you've got to put away basically the addiction to wearing your NS heart on your sleeve, which a lot of them did, to being really hardcore, to being absolute perfectionist. We've got to get rid of every last one of them. Will have total, they didn't call it remigration. Their remigration isn't new. It's just been rebranded. We called it repatriation. Exactly the same thing. Either, and some people were saying it's got to be forced. Other people saying we're given lots of money. Others were saying, well, when the benefits are cut off, they'll all go home. All these different things. And so I was saying, you can do it now in 1996. You won't be able to do it in 30 years' time. So I haven't changed my position. All that's changed are the demographics. And by the time we got to 2014, when the BNP was stopped by various factors, primarily the rise, or rather promotion, of Farage and UKIP in order to block us, at that point, the time was up. So from 2014 onwards, basically, I've had more than 10 years, people saying to me, Nick, will you get back involved in politics, form a political party, we'll join you, the public are ready. Yes, but it'll be a lie. Because to say, we've got a political party, join us, vote for us, we'll put it all right. But nobody's going to put it right. So here's the absolute crux of it, really, in terms, forget them. Think in terms just of our population. The demographics of the entire industrial world, and there's an element of the white replacement and the deliberate attacks on our people by the usual suspects. But it's not just us, it's the Japanese, it's the South Koreans, it's the Chinese, everybody. It's everywhere where industrialism, capitalism, and consumerism and feminism and the pill have coincided.
So the South Koreans are maybe the furthest ahead, are they? They're almost like
the South Koreans. You're right. The South Koreans are even worse than us. But everywhere this happens, we're in a position now that if nothing's done to change the birth rate, so let's assume just nothing's done, so it just stays as it is. Yeah. And actually, there's every much bit as much possibility that it can get even worse. than it can be got better. So if it just stays as it is,
Yeah.
by the end of this century, so that's certainly in the lives of all young children these days, and their children. By the end of this century, our population will crash by the equivalent of 2 Black Deaths. Now, anyone who's among your audience is old enough to have proper education at school when proper history was still taught, would know that the Black Death wiped out 1/3 of the population of Europe. We're going to see 2 Black Deaths because our population is going to crash by 80%, not to 80%, by 80% by the end of this century. And there's nothing that's going to change that. It's already built into the demographics. To change it around, you would have to have, instead of 1.4 children per woman of childbearing age, which is the average now in Britain, which is partly pushed up by the faster breeding ethnic minorities who aren't breeding as fast as they used to. That's another question, but they're still faster than us. The average Pakistani family in Britain now is on 2.4. It's catastrophically low, actually, in human standards, in history standards, and it's dropping like a stone. But at present, it's holding our average up. Our average is probably 1.2. So in order to change that and put us back to the level of where we were in terms of demographic stability of 30 years ago, it would have to go like this. Every woman of childbearing age would have to have at least 3 children. Every single woman of childbearing age would have to have 3 children for 3 generations. That's for 80 years. And we'd only then be back where we started. It's as bad as that. So yes, you can say we'll do all sorts of things to have higher birth rates. And it could be done basically if a government came to power and said, right, you know what? No one's going to retire. You're going to work until you die. Because the demographics are such that we're going to have to pay women to stay at home and have kids. And it can't be like stay at home and your family be poorer. We've got to pay them an average industrial wage. We've got to pay them really good money. And the more children they have, the more money we've got to give them. So all you old bastards and all the queers, all the medically unfit people, all the people who can't have kids, all of you are going to have to taxed in order to pay a tiny number of women and girls, which is all we've now got left as a demographic breeding cohort, to have kids. And this has got to go on for 80 years. There's not the faintest possibility in a democracy of that happening. It's simply impossible to sell that because the age pyramid is so upside down. The votes of the old are always going to outweigh the votes of the young. People won't do it. A dictatorship, well, I suppose theoretically you could, but there's no possibility of a nationalist dictatorship coming to power anywhere in the white world and being allowed to survive by the global elite, by corporate capitalism, by the left, etc., etc. So it ain't going to change. You've got to be realistic.
Well, I mean, it must be.
Sorry, don't take this as a black pill. I don't think it's a black pill at all, but I'm sure come on to that in a bit.
Yeah, okay, we'll get into that because it is interesting, your ultimate take, although I have some questions about that. So I just didn't realize that you knew this 20 years ago and you saw the whole thing coming. So it's just a matter of the fact that you did the math of the business soberly.
I didn't.
Nobody else has.
I didn't understand it as well as I have done now. Not least some of the problem wasn't as bad then, but I certainly I could see. I knew where this was going to take us, and so then forget about our numbers. Just think about their numbers. If you go back to 1996, the year 2000, the number of places in Britain, or in Ireland for that matter, which had very significant ethnic minorities were really quite small still. But it was very clear that all the way the direction was headed. And it would be at the stage where, so remigration in Britain, and Rupert Lowe, who's an MP, independent now, he fell out with Farage and co, MP for Great Yarmouth on the east of England. He's quite a good chap, actually. He comes up with all sorts of stuff, good stuff. He's raised £500,000 for an independent grooming inquiry, for an example. So he's done some really quite decent stuff. And he's recently put together a very long, detailed program of how remigration is going to work. There's lots of people thinking, oh, it's fantastic. They've costed it, and it's however many £billion a year. I've got no problem with that. It's fine. It's well worth spending. It's vast amounts of money, and it's the logistics, how many you can get on a plane, and blah, blah, blah. But not at one point in it does he mention the words police, and the fact that Britain's police force are not on our side. Britain's police force is now one of the most woke-dominated institutions in the country. So they'd be on the other side. They'd be with the people. So if you think what's happening in Minnesota now, but there's all sorts of fuss because the last big raid they had there, and this hysterical liberal headlines, this fascist government of Trump and so on, these ICE raids, mass roundups. The last one was 50 people. Come on, it's not going to cut it. So to say, to talk about remigration without saying, what are we going to do about the fact that the police force are going to be on the same side as Antifa and the immigrant rioters? What do we do about that? And then there's not one word in this wonderful document about the army. And as I'm sure you'll be, I know you're quite young, but still you've got a cultural awareness, historic awareness of the trouble in Northern Ireland, where it took 26,000 British Army troops at any one time, plus the UDA, the official local government, local force, plus a very militarized police force, plus the loyalist paramilitaries, and they couldn't deal with the IRA, which at no point had more than 400 men on active service.
Right.
Now the British Army's total fighting strength is actually 45,000 men. They got more than that, but they're blokes who lost both legs in Afghanistan or are simply too old and fat to fight, etc., etc. So the fighting strength of the British Army is 45,000. The British Army today, and you have to rotate people. The British Army
some of those are women, probably, maybe
some of them
maybe
are women.
15.
Yeah, the British Army today, in its full strength, couldn't even control Northern Ireland if the IRA was back in business, let alone controlling Bradford.
The IRA is always lurking around here somewhere. I totally understand your point. Yeah.
So that's the problem. You simply, if you say remigration will sort it, you first of all got to explain how it's possible to get and keep state power, and then how it's possible to enforce this without a civil war. And are your people prepared to fight the civil war? Are you prepared to fight a civil war? Now, the answer for many young nationalists is damn right, bring it on. Yes. But to fight a civil war, you've got to have your people on your side. And I'm afraid that bourgeois Middle England, for that matter, bourgeois Middle Dublin, isn't interested in having its property values smashed to smithereens by a civil war when they'll think somehow they can try and muddle along. So it's simply, there's plenty of people at present in Britain especially pushing us for a civil war. The whole Zionist bloc, the counter-jihad element of nationalism, patriotism, and so on. It's an enormous thing. With vast amounts of money being, it's not just Tommy though. It's right through to GB News. It's a huge range, all of it funded with the same sort of people to push us into a civil war. And whether we get it or not, the fact is that the idea that a nationalist party, which might manage to come to power in about 20 years' time, because there's none of the populist parties in Europe going to deliver this. So you've got to go through a phase of the populists actually winning, the populists being kicked out, will be by a left-wing coalition, the populists winning again and again, letting people down, and then finally a nationalist government in 20, 25 years' time. You know it also mathematically. You know exactly what you have the prescience of, like Paul Moadib or something, because you've. But it sounds true. I mean, when I heard you say this before, I thought, Jesus Christ, he's being so realist. I can't believe it. All I had myself was a feeling, like when I heard this remigration talk, that it was not nearly enough, and it's a bit floofy and just a feeling. Yeah. But you totally put it into words, and you obviously, I mean, I agree. Being realist is very important. Yes. So don't get me wrong. If it was possible, let's say, that's it, fine. Yes. Yeah. Because what we got is a disaster, and what we're going to go into is clearly we are going to be a minority in our own country. It's absolutely unavoidable. Well, absolutely something catastrophically amazing. Whether it's some kind of plague that only primarily attacks one group of people, or a literal act of God. Other than that, we're going to be a minority in our own country, which is a terrible thing because it's morally wrong and it's dangerous, and it creates the possibility of, it's not really civil war, because civil war would be me against my cousins and so on. It's not, but so it's an ethnic war in our country. So it's a terrible thing to look at. That's what could come from it. So it should never have happened, but we are where we are. So what's going to happen? Well, we're going to be the minority. And it seems to me that a lot of the people who are now fixated on the remigration, there's lots of people who want to say this, they say, to sell out, it's wicked, he's gone soft and all the rest of it. I think they're fixated on remigration, partly because they can't face the idea of a real struggle which especially is a real struggle, which if we are to hold our own, let alone to win the struggle, we have to develop community. More than anything else, we have to change 3 words into 3 other words. We have to change our pronouns. We have to go from I, me, and mine to we, us, and ours.
Yeah.
That's the absolute crux of it. And as long as we do that, yes, we become the minority. We're not going to be swamped by Muslims. The Muslim population in Britain 20 years ago was having probably 4.5 children per woman of childbearing age. It's now down to 2.4 because partly of which their attitude, their community's attitude to education and our elites' attitude to them in education and then business and so on, with all the diversity, inclusivity, discrimination, positive discrimination in favor of them. They are going to university at a far higher level than our kids, not just white working class kids, but white kids generally now. And especially they're sending their daughters to university. Well, that's it. Kiss goodbye to their demographic boom, because once a girl goes to university, that's it. She's almost certainly going to come out the other end, if not as a lesbian, certainly as a feminist. Or at the very best, she's going to be a career woman who might get married at the age of 38 and have 1 child. So that's where they're going. So we're not going to be taken over by them. And we're not. I think the immigration problem the whole of Europe is going to face over the next 25 years. It's overwhelmingly going to be from Africa, because most of the Muslim countries, Bangladesh now, their birth rate's 2. So they're not even replacing themselves anymore. Pakistan's still higher. Afghanistan's still higher. The whole of the Maghreb, North Africa, it's dropped like a stone. So we're not going to be swamped by Muslims, which can be a cohesive, very powerful and dangerous force. We're going to be swamped primarily by Africans. Well, it ain't a good idea, I'll tell you that. But they're not going to take over as a Muslim bloc. And then people say, oh, we're going to end up like the Boers. Orania will be like the last place. We'll be surrounded. We'll be murdered in our farmsteads. That's not the case, because the Boers are 1 million people and the population was at 50, 60 million. We will still be the largest minority. It depends what kind of minority we are. If we're an atomized, individualistic, or cowardly, or head in the sand minority, we're screwed. If you stick your head in the sand, someone will shag you from behind, because that's it. You've got to get your head out of the sand. Now, if you're an organized minority, no one pushes you around. And the place that the whole of the white world has to look to is Ireland, historically, in terms of where we are there. Because Ireland is a place where, I won't give you an Irish history lesson, but basically, from the moment...
Well, you could. I'm actually from... I moved here. I'm from Canada. I'm not actually...
I did think the accent wasn't totally...
No.
Which bit of Ireland...
I've lived here for a while.
I haven't come across, because I don't know this accent. Right. So, in very, very... what proportion of your audience is Irish, by the way?
Oh, I don't even know. Jesus. Most of them are just Americans and that, I think.
It's not high. Right. Okay.
I don't discuss Irish... I don't discuss Irish politics and stuff, just because it's a mystery to me. It's the most incomprehensible politics I've ever seen, and I don't bother discussing Canadian politics because it's just, what is the point? Jesus Christ, there's nothing more.
Yeah, right. Okay then. So in very simple terms, because this isn't about the politics of Ireland. This is about the politics, the reality of being a minority. From the moment of the Reformation and English settlement of the island of Ireland, the Protestants were a minority. Yeah. And for 400 or 500 years, every generation, the Catholics, then later on Republicans, would rise up and try and slaughter them. Because we're going to kick them all out. We're going to remigrate the Prods to England and Scotland. Yeah. And they tried to do it with force repeatedly. And the Protestant communities banded together. And the two sides weren't always fighting against each other, but the Prods were ready for it. And sometimes they got massacred, and sometimes they went and massacred, and after the revolt, they hanged their Catholic neighbours. But no one got rid of them because they were an organised, effective, cohesive minority. Then in 1922, you had partition. So Ireland was split up between the Catholic nationalist south and the small piece in the northeast, where the majority of the population was Protestant, not English, Scots-Irish. It's totally different kettle of fish. They basically belong there, I would say. Your Irish viewers would disagree probably, but I would say they belong there. But in any case, it's a matter of might is right when it comes to holding land as a community. Yeah. The The others couldn't get rid of them. They sent up, Collins and so on, sent up waves of young men to go and fight the prods in Northern Ireland. They came up with broad County Cork accents, pretended to be from West Belfast. They were picked up with the police, taken out and shot in huge numbers. So it didn't happen. The Protestants, now having been a minority in Ireland, were now a majority in Northern Ireland, and they were sitting pretty. So now the Catholics in Northern Ireland, they were actually a minority. And they were quite brutally oppressed and held down by the Protestant ascendancy there for the best part of 100 years. You didn't get rid of them. They responded to being a minority by doing things to build a more effective minority community and to defend themselves. I'm not talking here about guns and bombs. They did something particularly. They created the Gaelic Athletics Association. This was a matter of building a cultural identity of Irishness as opposed to what they call West Brits, which was the thing. If you wanted to get on in middle-class Irish society, you might be a Catholic, but you had to really become a West Brit. So you had to sort of assimilate to the English influence. And they didn't want this. So they looked at games because that affects young men, which is the future of the cause and the revolution. And they said, look, all the games we play, cricket, rugby, football, they call them garrison games. They're the games of the occupier. And to stop young Irishmen playing the games of the occupier and thereby drifting in the way of towards the occupier mentality, they created, or basically refound and organised, games which were vaguely mentioned in the ancient texts and annals of Ireland, such as hurling, which is a bit like lacrosse, fought with a stick, and it's quite brutal and so on. Irish football as well. And they created games, and hurling is now the national sport of Ireland. They still play rugby, very good at it, but hurling is the national sport. And that became the way in which young men just came through. They were in that. They weren't interested in the things from the English side. And it helped to build their community. Now, for the last 3 or 4 years, it's very, very recent, the higher Catholic birth rate has tipped the majority, so that now the Protestants are now a minority even in Northern Ireland. Now, if they follow the logic of the remigrationists who say, unless we do it by magic in 20 years, we're all doomed. The minute we're a minority, we're going to be murdered on our beds. They need to go to Northern Ireland and look, because I've been going to Northern Ireland and mixing primarily in the loyalist areas for 50 years on and off. And I can tell you that the main feature of loyalist popular working class culture is the marching band. And out of 1 million people, they've got 800 marching bands. And these are overwhelmingly working class. They give up their time, they raise the money for uniforms and so on. They parade with a precision which is way in advance of the British Army, which isn't saying very much, although the Brits are better than the Canadians and the Dutch, but it's an extraordinary thing. And it's more powerful now than it was, because it's the way in which a community which feels itself under pressure, and their enemy is far worse than any blacks or Muslims that we faced. The IRA murdered 3,000 of them out of a population of 1 million. It's a huge number. And yet they don't feel at risk at all. They're there with their culture. And when they have these band parades, all the girls come along and they watch and they look at who's best playing the flute and so on. At the end of the parade, they always have a fight, because that's what the Scots-Irish do. They get drunk and they fight, and the girls are seeing who's the toughest and all the rest of it. And a lot of the girls go in the colour parties, and they're all pregnant by the time they're 19. They get married, they've got lots of kids. And so no one is going to get rid of that community. There's still hardcore Republicans who are saying we're going to drive when we'll finally get Brits out of Ireland, and that'll be all the oranges, as they call them. That's the people who follow the Orange Lodge, which is the Protestant loyalist side. We'll drive them all out. They'll simply leave. No, they won't. Because they're organised, cohesive, strong communities. Nobody messes with them. But the message finally on this, the message that comes from the band, the way the bands came into being, was the loyalists used to march with militias. The loyalist militias used to march with muskets and rifles. And the Brits came in and said, you can't be doing this, stop this. So it was illegal. The long prison sentences, or even worse, if you marched around with a rifle in unauthorised militia. So they said, we're not a militia, we're a marching band. And they left the rifles at home and they took flutes and drums. But if you got 50 or 60 young men who will march with military precision, who respond to orders, who know each other, who fight against the other bands, for fun, if there's a crisis in your community, doesn't matter whether you're giving them pickaxe handles or guns, you've got a military unit, and that's it. So nobody's going to mess with that community. Now that's, I'm not saying that's but the thing that our communities need to do. There's many more things that can be done in our communities, working class communities especially, by nationalists who, instead of coming back to Rupert Lowe, the British nationalist, not British nationalist, the British patriot MP, he's talking about, despite the fact the next election, if it's won by anyone vaguely on the right, it'll be won by Reform and Nigel Farage. He's saying we've got, because Farage is basically a cop-out, a sellout who won't really do anything, which is entirely true. We've got to offer people an alternative. So therefore, I'm working to make sure that there's a candidate in at least more than half the constituencies in Britain, and we're going to fight a campaign, and we'll give the British people a choice. All this will achieve is each of them will get about 100 votes instead of the 25,000, the 15, 20,000 they need to win. They might, in a few places, that 100 votes will mean that instead of Reform winning, because there'll be votes taken off Reform, instead of Reform winning, the Labour Party will win. And Farage is a sellout and a Zionist stooge, but he's not as bad as Keir Starmer, who's even worse. So all they'll do is give the Labour Party a few extra seats, and they would waste, even if they fought a low-level campaign, just the deposit you have to pay to stand, plus a leaflet, plus a few campaign materials, £2,500. To win a seat, you spend £50,000. So if they spent £5,000 each, they'd be spending a tenth of what someone who's actually expecting to win would spend. And even if it's only 2,500, if you do that in 300-400 seats, it's £500,000. It's $750,000 or euros. It's a staggering sum of money to spend to absolutely be guaranteed to lose an election. And if that money was put into local community things, you straight up, and if the work and activism of the 30,000 members of Lowe's Restore operation, if that was put into building community structures, you immediately would come out within a year with a population which was far more cohesive, far more efficient, and is on the road to being a minority which would not only hold its own, but actually in Britain, it's not as if it's us, the British minority, and everyone else is against us. It's not like that at all. The Sikhs, for instance, would be on our side. A million of them. Very tough fighting men. There's not that many Gurkhas. They'd be absolutely on our side. The Hindus and the Shia Muslims wouldn't be against us. They'll be against the Sunni Muslims, if it comes to it. So as long as we're, and all of those people, and there's plenty, some of them are utter scumbags. We've got scumbags too. Plenty of them are actually quite decent people. They came to Britain largely because they were coming to a country which was stable, which had values they respected, and where their kids could get a better life. And as they see Britain becoming this multiracial shithole, then the only way of keeping it vaguely stable and decent actually is that the indigenous British still remain the dominant force in a cultural way and as a sort of pole of attraction. Otherwise, you've just got utter chaos. So we'd have plenty of these minorities actually on our side, and long term. So looking further ahead, what's the end of this? Providing we have a sensible, healthy birth rate, and that's not that difficult to do. If you get young men, instead of putting them sitting in their their upstairs bedroom late at night, spouting crazed extremism on the internet and doing nothing, all behind pseudonyms, it's pathetic, really. It's childish stuff. If instead of that, simply get out into the community and do things, they will meet young women. Now, the business of all the incel types and so on, I detest this stuff.
Oh, they're terrible.
It's all of it from stupid middle class kids who are they're judging. I don't know if they're autistic or whether they've had their brains scrambled by living all their lives on.
I think they're just weak. They're just giving up. They're making an armor for weakness.
And the other thing, there's one point which is fair, that they do judge the young women sort of in their lives or near them, and think, oh my God, that you can't live with that thing, but the problem is that it's a middle class thing. They're looking at these middle class university girls, who, as I was saying before, it's not just so the Pakistani community is now, and the Bengalis as well. They're now just beginning to see what happens when their girls are told you can have a career. It's an extreme form of exploitation. You can have a career, have a job, and have children. Yeah, come on.
Yeah.
I mean, a career's hard enough. You want to come home and relax. No, they've got to come home and cook the dinner and look after the kids and all the rest of it. It's grotesque capitalist exploitation. But when the incel type lads look at the girls, they're looking at those. And in fact, there's plenty of perfectly decent working class girls who just want a decent man who won't get drunk all the time, won't beat them up, and will be a decent father to her children. There's plenty of them out there. But again, because these incel types, they're all up themselves and they like to read and discuss Nietzsche, and they want a girl they can discuss Nietzsche with. Well, come on, that's not what women are for. Yeah,
is that what they do? I didn't even know they did that.
Yeah, well, that's their excuse for not going out and just getting a girl who just wants them to be kind and decent, and to listen to them talking about girly things every now and again. Their excuse is, well, I couldn't discuss Nietzsche and so on with them. Actually, it's because they're scared stiff of women. It's rather childish, but again,
no, it is.
You go.
It is.
But it's not inevitable. There's so much, and the crux of this, why I'm really up, what I said earlier, it's not a black pill. Why I'm so optimistic about this is that the thing which has really screwed our people down overall has been being atomized individuals in a very comfortable consumer society where we were just guaranteed to be the minority, to be the majority. Nothing was ever going to change. And we're entering to a stage now when liberalism is being beaten out of our young people as we speak. So the liberalism is finished and the cozy comfort is finished. And especially in Britain, just over the last 12 months, there's been this sea change. I said I did a program, quite a hardline Muslim program, the 5 Pillars, a few weeks ago, and I said to them, well, I think they took it. I said, you people, I don't think you realise yet. When you're thinking about the British people and dealing with the British people, you're thinking of the British people that you and your parents dealt with for the last 50 years. So they've gone. The British people you're dealing with right now are a totally different breed to what you're used to, because something's flipped in the head. And we saw it. That's what the Raise the Colours thing was all about, with the British flags and the George Cross flags, or the Scottish Saltire in Scotland, going on everywhere as a protest against immigration. But it's a mass tribalisation, and it's gone on at an incredible speed, and it's only just starting. And once we're a tribal people under some kind of pressure and having to be more cohesive, white people are naturally individualistic. Obviously, you can't get rid of that completely. But once we're more cohesive and having to stand up for ourselves, then there's no particular problem here. There's no particular problem being a minority. It'll actually, the culture of those working class communities in Northern Ireland is so much stronger than the culture of similar communities in England and Scotland, where there's nothing to do for young lads. There's nothing to live for. So instead of being in the band, they're shooting up on smack. They're absolutely screwed, those areas, because they haven't got this community spirit. And we're within that close reach now of being able to start to build real community spirit for our people. And I would guess that the same will be true in many other white countries. I don't know about America. I've been there a number of times. I'm banned from there now. Obviously, it's so much bigger. There's still a possibility. There's the possibility to move away somewhere else. But young educated young men, they can't move away from a system which now means basically you can go to university, you can get a huge debt, you can get a degree, but because you are a heterosexual white male, you're not going to get promoted. And that is you can already see what it's doing to people, can't you?
Yeah. So you're saying these communities absolutely then have to hire their own and not have any kind of, like, how do you get around these DEI policies then if you want to?
Well, DEI, they primarily affect big companies hiring people and so on. And I'm talking about, so forget for a minute the employment. Well, for a start, so here's one thing. I would say to any young man, unless by chance you're potentially a nuclear physicist or a really good lawyer, with the potential to become a really good lawyer, and you are absolutely committed when you get there and you're established to doing pro bono work for the cause, in the way that, say, the IRA had lawyers who were,
which is a vital job. If
it's vital, someone's got to do it. But apart from that small number, do not go to university, because you get this worthless degree, a mountain of debt, and you don't get the job. Go and become a plumber, an electrician, a plasterer, a bricklayer, a carpenter, a skilled tradesman. These are jobs which AI cannot do. It's going to be a long while even before robots can do them. And the irony is the middle class jobs now taken by the ethnic minorities and the affirmative action hires of all sorts, they're the ones about over the next 10 years going to be wiped out by AI, whereas the jobs out of offices, out of factories, and in ordinary people's houses and lives, they're still going to be there. And the beauty of this, above all else, there is that who's got the jobs which a young man, a young Brit, a young American, young Canadian who's just got himself qualified as a skill as a carpenter. Who else is in the carpentry jobs at present? I'll tell you, it's men nearly my age, because the demographics are such, and because we've had 30 years or so when all intelligent young lads have been encouraged to go to university. There's a huge gap for tradesmen, an enormous gap. And the more our people become tribal, the more our people, one of the ways in which you could be tribal without getting into trouble is if you've got a choice. You want someone to do some work in your house. If you've got a choice between a hard-working Pakistani or one of your own people, it's your right to choose, and you'll choose them. And what's more, when everyone else is worrying increasingly about, I get my salary through the bank and all the rest of it, the government's going to see it, they can control everything. Well, if you've got a trade which you can sell for cash, or if push really comes to shove, you can barter with your neighbour, you can be almost self-sufficient without being involved in the financial economy. And these are the sort of things to do. Most community building isn't even about the DEI stuff. It's about coming together and cooking food for large numbers of people, having community meals, looking after the elderly who can't afford meals, running soup kitchens for homeless veterans, and so on. For an example, in Britain, there's an increasing thing now where the super rich, or not even the super rich, the very rich, the upper middle classes in London and so on, they live in gated communities with their own security force, and increasingly now, even in their own area, they're hiring a private police force. The Jewish community in their big areas in North London and Manchester and so on, they've got what they call the Community Security Trust.
Do you think they would ever let white? Do you think they would let white people get their own police force? I mean, it would take.
Well,
that would really.
They won't let white people have their own police force. But we did an experiment in the British National Party in one of our towns. They had the local police. It was a small town, about 8,000, 10,000 people, south of England. The local police station closed, and they started to get a lot of trouble with just bored kids causing trouble. And the police just didn't respond. So our group created a thing they called COPS, Community Observation Patrol, and they started patrolling. And initially they patrolled in high-vis jackets and so on. And the police went berserk, the press went berserk, but they weren't in any way doing something. There's a law in Britain against organising force for political purposes, but just local people patrolling their own area to look out for kids causing trouble and encourage them to stop or calling the police. No law against that, so they did this. They actually found after a bit that they were better off in plain clothes as deterrent than with the high-vis vests, because by doing that, the kids who knew they were out, they were watching them and so on, when they had high-vis vests on, the kids could see them. It was just them. They weren't scared of anybody else. When they took the high-vis vests off, it got so the kids looked at any group of 2 or 3 older men walking around, and they assumed it could be the cops patrol, who've got walkie-talkie radios and so on, and cameras and everything. So they were scared of anybody. So they started to behave themselves. After a bit, the police started to cooperate with them because they were getting intelligence from the local community, from people who wouldn't, quite a working class area, people wouldn't talk to the police. You don't do it. It's grassing basically. So you don't talk to the police, but they would tell these people would pass it on to the police. So in the end, they were accepted. They were becoming part of the local community, very effective. And the state dealt with it by reopening the police station. That was it. But suppose if you had to do this in one place, nothing is done. I'm pretty sure that if you had an organised white community police force in Britain, say in 50 towns and areas, if people involved in them had previously been involved in hardline nationalist organisations and had got the usual tattoos, etc., they'd be stamped on pretty hard, pretty quickly. But if it's rather cleaner than that, if it's people who've been clean skins all along, no, they wouldn't be. But after a bit, they would change the law, probably to ban this. But by this stage, if people were fairly quick on it, you might have 100 of these groups working and respected and liked by their local area. And it's banned. But exactly what do they ban? And if they banned them, they also had to ban the Community Security Trust. Or all of a sudden we've got absolutely blatant that the Jewish community is allowed something that nobody else is. At present, the situation is the Jewish community have this because they're the only people who need it. That's the line.
Right.
And that's very, people think, oh, okay. In fact, they don't even think about it. It's logical. It's it. Whereas if you get to the stage where they're allowed to have it, but it's taken off us, then even though you can no longer protect your community, you've radicalized your community, and you can get them to do other things. You simply redeploy to other ways of organizing and working for your community. For that matter, what do they do? So they probably ban wearing uniforms. So like I said, so initially you'd start wearing high-vis vests, and when it's banned, you just go around without them, and actually it's better than before. How do they gauge what a security patrol is? Is 2 men or 3 men walking down the street a possible community patrol? Because if they are, the police force is going to make itself extraordinarily unpopular in working class communities. And at some stage, if the police force make themselves that unpopular, again, you get to what happened in Northern Ireland. The police force, they can, although they're woke bullies at present, they're also cowards. And they live in the communities roughly where they work. People know that, oh, that house is a police officer lives there. A police force in that position isn't capable long term of actually really going up. They can go up against nationalist dissidents. They can go up against pro-Palestinians. They cannot go up against an entire population repressing them because they live amongst them and their wives will get too much trouble and all the rest of it. So the police force simply won't do it. So a lot of nationalists say the minute you suggest any one of these things, oh, the state wouldn't allow it. Well, many of these things, so for instance, setting up a local community centre as a charity thing, nationalists could do very easily. They do it in Northern Ireland, both sides of the community divide. You could do that. So they could pass a law against it, but then they'd be closing down a vast number of genuine local charities, and it would cause far more trouble than they can take. So, or again, as I say, if it does happen, well, you simply move to something else, or you disguise it somewhat. But there's so many nationalists who come up with these things. Some of them are genuine questions. But what about, because I want to get my head around this, I want to be sure that what you're saying is absolutely practical before I abandon the highly practical remigration bollocks. Yeah. But with a lot of them, I tell you sadly, it's not. It's just an excuse for doing nothing.
And they should listen to you, considering your experiences.
Sorry, it comes back to a problem with youngsters who are scared of their own shadows because they're not used to mixing with people. And they need to get out there and mix with people and do things with people, because actually it's great fun and it's very, very easy. Sorry, over to you.
Sorry. Okay, so someone made a comment here. I have so many questions. Well, let's say 6 questions. I'd like to answer as briefly as you could because I want to get through. And so I just want to read the comment someone says because I just thought of it. I thought it's pertinent. He says, Bengal9977 says, it's amazing how sensible and normal Nick is in reality compared to the image created back in 2010. So I find this interesting because, well, look, it's because you knew all these things all the way back then. And now all the talking points you would have had that you were so badly persecuted for, you're not allowed in America, you just said, are things that everybody's talking about, fairly openly now, pretty much, right? So you really, you just were ahead of your time in that regard. And one question I had was, having all the realizations you did, having the enormous blackpilling you must have had in 2014, I think, as you said, you almost alone, I guess, and whoever, because you're the only person I've heard say this, knowing that, okay, that's it, it's over, we're going to be a minority. And, all the hopeful talk you've had to sit through since then. I mean, that's, over 10 years ago since. I don't know.
And it's getting worse.
So, but in your prediction then of living as a minority, and having done the maths in all these other ways, do you have a prediction, numbers wise? Do you see? Have you thought that far ahead in the future since you have this prescience?
Yeah,
let me just say, in terms of a number that you feel or reaches a point where there might even be a sort of a bounce back, or or how do you see the future really?
I see the future. Well, the big question mark is how many more immigrants do they keep bringing in?
Yeah,
because if they say, well, we're letting 10 million Africans, then that'd be good night Vienna. On the other hand, there's virtually no community in Britain would accept that. not the Pakistanis, not the existing black communities. Nobody would accept it, so it couldn't be done. So in terms of population scale, as I say, by the end of the century, the population of any white country in the world will be 20% of what it is now, roughly speaking. Other than it might go, one thing will make it go up, and that is the minute people are under this consciously and subconsciously siege mentality, us against them, and a sort of, it's not a war, but it's a conflict. People tend to have more children. So the population and the minorities have felt like minorities, so they've had that effect already. They, if anything, will be more secure. We'll be less secure. People tend to have larger families, and it's rather up to nationalists. If 10,000 young nationalists in a country the size of Britain decided to get with 10,000 girls, and they're out there in, even if it's wacky evangelical churches and so on, there's young girls that just want to do the right thing. So 10,000 young lads do that and decide not to have 3 kids, but to have 8 kids, which is what the Amish do. How am I going to afford that? Well, one, you can live on the dole if you have to. You can live on the state like you say that they do, and then work on the black, which is what they do. Or just become an electrician, a plasterer, or a plumber, because you'll have as much work as you possibly want, because there's a vast dearth of skilled tradesmen, young tradesmen, all over our world because of what's gone on. So you can manage it. In the end, the Lord provides. There was a time, my wife and I had 4 children. And there was a time when literally, if we wanted to eat meat, sometimes the only choice was roadkill. It was pheasant, rabbit, badger. That was it.
Oh, really?
Because we couldn't afford. We had a bit of a smallholder. We had plenty of vegetables and so on.
You lived in the country, obviously.
Yes, yeah. Apart from the 1 pig a year we would rear for ourselves. That was it. Sometimes we couldn't afford meat. It wasn't all the time by any means, but this is what happens if you're working in politics and trying to have lots of kids and rebuild a house where the only income really is from a nurse. But we managed, and we had a wonderful time. And our kids were sufficiently pleased, I guess, with their upbringing, despite all the problems, that I've got 11 grandchildren. So, it's, if you want to have children, you can have children. There's not one person watching this show now who hasn't got ancestors, whether they know them or not, who just 100 or 120 years ago were living in appalling slum conditions, or working down pits or in mills that were desperately dangerous, or in Canada were felling trees. Being a lumberjack, I spent 2 years in the woods as a lumberjack. It's one of the most dangerous jobs in the country, in the world.
Yeah, it kind of sucks.
It's a dangerous job, but you can do these. You can do these things. You can have kids, and even if a small number of nationalists settle down and do that, the way that the geometric progression of change goes, there is no doubt that at present we're being self-selected. The populations all over the world are being self-selected for people who are religious, because religious people tend to have larger families. For people who are traditionalist, because traditionalist people have larger families. The liberals liberals are painlessly breeding themselves out of existence because they're not breeding. They're disappearing. The future is more people, like us. Like our people are.
So in your prediction, in your 20% prediction,
my prediction is, so we'd be 20%, but their population is going to be dropping as well.
I just wanted to ask, does that include the liberals being not breeding? You factor that in, yeah?
Yes, yeah.
Oh yeah,
okay. Sure, because they're already in the stats, as it were. So let us say that we're not going to drop below 30%. I don't believe. Not for a very, very long time. If we give up and our population is utterly divided and depressed and demoralized, of course we will. But if nationalists do the job and help to galvanize what will happen naturally, organically in any case, you can see it happening, like I say, with the with the flags and everything else. This is happening in any case. Nationalists could make a huge difference in galvanizing it. We can short circuit the process. So I believe that's where we'll be. We've got a serious chance of going through a cil war. A serious chance. And my position is that if we have a civil war, again, because I spent a lot of time in Northern Ireland and read a lot of history and all the rest of it. So if we have a civil war, we won't get rid of them. In Britain, to win a civil war, you'd have to expel some 5 million people. Well, it didn't happen in Yugoslavia. It hasn't happened in Northern Ireland. It doesn't happen anywhere. Hasn't even happened yet in South Africa, for heaven's sake. It's just not like that. So we'll have a civil war. At the end of a 30-year civil war, it's the stage in which men who were children at the start of it are now parents themselves and can see their young lads going down the same road, and they've all buried people. People get sick of it, and they go for peace. And we'll end up with a peace which is a balkanized Britain or a balkanized United States, with our communities and their communities and fences between them. And we'll end up with peace because probably the Chinese will come in and say, look, we can make lots of money rebuilding this place, but we've got to have peace, so we'll pay you to stop. And this is what they did in Northern Ireland. They spent all those years fighting the IRA. In the end, they realized you just give them money. And they gave money to the Protestant paramilitaries and to the Irish, the IRA and the offshoots, and they paid them to go away. And the ones who refused to accept a peace deal, they simply got the other side to shoot them. So 30 years down the line, you'll have a peace deal, but then you've got full graveyards. You've got utterly smashed up communities. There wouldn't be one cathedral left standing because they'll be burnt down in revenge tit-for-tat attacks that would go on between the communities. You've got a wrecked country, and at the end of it, you get a peace deal where the 2 sides or 3 sides or 4 sides agree basically to live in peace and try and find a way to get on. And I'd rather short-circuit the process, talk to them, organise our communities so that they're so strong that everybody understands, you know what, we can't get rid of the Brits. We can't conquer the Brits. We can't Islamify the Brits. We just got to learn a way to live with them in this country or leave. And there's the other thing, a really interesting factor. Several very well-connected Muslims I speak to quite regularly, each of them has told me independently, Nick, over the last year, I haven't spoken to a single young Muslim who doesn't want to leave this country. Because it's cold, it's wet, we're not liked, there's trouble in the wind, and the job, most of the job prospects are so lousy, they want to go to America or they want to go to Dubai.
Right.
That's it. So
Dubai,
lots of Brits are leaving, but some of the Brits, who the statistics sharp is leaving, they're actually young Pakistanis, young Bangladeshis, who coming from desperately poor areas where the white kids are just sitting around on the dole in all probability, or in dead-end jobs. They're the bin men. Yeah. The Muslim kids are and the Hindu kids as well. They're going to university and they're getting careers and degrees and so on. No jobs in Britain. All they want to do is to move, and lots of them will move.
Right. So you mentioned you think there'll be sort of like 4 final groups, 4 final power blocks. So there's us. I assume Muslims. Is it Hindus and then Africans?
Yep, there's us, the Muslims, the Hindus. The Africans are a strange thing because, of course, they're drastically torn. Like in Britain, we've got lots of West Indians and lots now of Africans, and they hate it. They hate each other. They hate each other.
That's what I mean. Like that's what you don't have in Ireland. Is this? There's so many more. There's like at least 2 other groups on top of it, and some of them are this radically kind of impulsively low IQ, violent. That's the difference between the situation and Ireland. You know, the Protestants and Catholic, Scots, Irish, and Irish people are just not so dissimilar. So that's the one question I have. Like that's a bit different. That I wonder how have you factored that in? Like,
it's difficult to tell. So with the blacks, because there's so many different groups and so on. Then you've got the question, say, of the Black Axe gang, the Nigerian mafia and so on. They're just going to want it for themselves. They'll be up against the Albanians. All of them will be up against the Ukrainians, and good luck with that because they get me armed to the teeth. So there's all sorts of messes. There's messes like that. So the question of where do the blacks go? Some of them, especially the half castes and so on, some of them will generally be on our side. You've got black fellows who served in the army. And so they've got their broad local accent, and everyone in the community likes them and gets on with them. And nationalist purists might say, but, think of the gene pool and so on. Fair enough. But the local community accepts them as them. So that's it. They'll be on one side. There's a tendency, especially most of the black criminals, they go into prison, they come out as black Muslim criminals. They haven't really been converted, but you get better treatment and better food. And you're part of a big, powerful gang, which matters in prison. So lots of them will cease to be Muslims when they're in prison. But if there was the potential for a Muslim takeover, so there's real power, and there's, at the far end of this spectrum, there's the ISIS white sex slave business. then of course they'll do that. But essentially, all those people, all of them have a pack and a cowardly mentality to a degree. And if a white community lies down and says, yeah, do what you want to us, or sits with its, as I said before, with its head in the sand for the next 20 years, pretending there's an electoral tooth fairy at the end going to wave a magic wand, then they'll be able to do with our community what they want. But if our communities are organized and disciplined, they will look at our community and think, we are not going near that thing because it's best left quiet, just doing its own business. So broadly speaking, there's if the radical Zionist fake nationalist bloc has its way and we get a civil war, broadly speaking, it'll be us and the Muslims and the Hindus and the Sikhs with us. That's the broad bit. If on the other hand,
the Hindus are with us, or they're on their own.
Oh, the Hindus are on their own, but the Muslims and the Hindus hate each other far more than they hate us.
Yeah.
So they've got no choice in the end but to be rather on our side, right. Which I don't want them here. This is one of the problems with Nigel Farage. He's persuading the British people that he's going to stop immigration because he's talked tough on immigration. He's actually said there'll be net zero migration. So as long as the numbers stay the same, we're all happy. So last year, 700,000 British citizens left the country forever, or at least emigrated, apparently not coming back. Now perhaps 50,000 of them are Muslims and Hindus, quite possibly.
Sorry. Where is there a place they're mostly going to? Is there a place destination?
The primary destination is America.
Okay.
Second, I think, is probably Australia. Dubai is third. It's all over the place. But so therefore, under Farage's rules, if 700,000 leave, 700,000 can come in. And what Farage says is that we've got to pick where we get them. So we don't want people from Muslim failed states. But India will have 700,000 Indian graduates. Half those graduates, of course, will have graduation certificates which aren't worth the paper they were printed on because they're fake. So we'll have 700,000 new Hindus every single year. Well, thanks, but no thanks. I really don't want that. But if push comes to shove and we get a civil war, they are not going to fight on the side of the Muslims. So I'm not saying we have to have a civil war. I'm saying we might get it. If we don't get it, then you'll simply end up with communities will fall apart into their own circle. If you want to see what that looks like, you could go to Lebanon. You could have gone to Syria, which were totally multicultural, multi-ethnic societies. And before the Zionists and the Western imperialists went in and smashed them up and encouraged them to fight each other, they generally got along quite well, side by side, for hundreds of years. You could go to Russia, which large parts of Russia is white, but Russia, the further east you go, the more you get, there's whole different ethnic groups living side by side and working side by side, but they socialize by themselves and they have kids by themselves and they carry on existing. You go to Malaysia, to India, which has got the biggest population in the world, really, of young people. And India, it's a sort of functioning democracy. If you've got a democratic fetish, get on with that, fine. It's a sort of functioning democracy. It's a rapidly modernizing industrial society. And it speaks a couple of languages, including English, but it's got hundreds of different religious and ethnic sects and groups and tribes, and they're not becoming a coffee-colored multi-cult. They each of them stay to their own groups, but they don't go and fight each other. There was a time when they fought each other, where in the end, horror of the idea of a multicultural Britain came from my father, who was a young RAF man during the Second World War, stationed in India, training young Indian technicians in radios. And he said they were all they were nice lads, only a few years younger than him. They all got along great. It was fantastic. And then one day, basically, they all went absent without leave, and they were all busy killing each other's families. Because one side were Muslim, and one side were Hindus. And the divisions there were largely stoked up by the British over centuries. They did it in places like Cyprus as well, because you're trying to dominate the natives with a tiny force of soldiers and bureaucrats. And if the natives gather together in a nationalistic revolt, you're out. So the British deliberately imported the most radical Islamism they possibly could into those Muslim communities in order to make the Muslims and the Hindus hate and fear each other so much they accepted British rule. And we see exactly the same thing going on now with, yes, it's the Zionists with their special interest to do this, but capitalism and the GovCorps types who, what they want, this total surveillance state where basically we're all serfs with nothing to do, but everything's in the hands of the super rich. Of course, they want multicultural societies, because multicultural societies, if they're going to fight anyone, they tend to fight each other. And while the peasants with the pitchforks are hating the peasants with the flaming torches, the peasants with the pitchforks and the flaming torches don't march on the castle and get rid of the actual oppressors. That's part of the game.
And what do you think of like looking at countries like in South America and Brazil and that, where you sort of see a country run ostensibly by the white people, but they're in gated communities, and I guess there's like 2 or 3 races involved there. Amerindians and some blacks, and then white people.
That's the other possible way that it ends for those people who want to put up with it. Right. That it may just, if they can manage to keep, supposing AI and robotization actually, rather than causing disasters, actually does lead to a fair bit of overall economic benefit. There is enough money to throw to the unemployed and so on. They keep things stable, and with through a wing and a prayer, they manage to get through, and they keep this thing stable for a long time. We could end up with basically certainly the cities of Europe looking like Brazil, where you've got a rigorous class structure of wealth, which is almost directly correlated with the degree of whiteness with the genes. And you might end up with that. Well, if you end up with that, then there's still the option for people who are consciously white communities, or for that matter, Muslim communities of Pakistani origin, any community, or the Chinese, any community that wants to keep itself to itself can do. Because, and all the state can do, all the global elite can do, they can propagandize to their heart's content, like with every single TV advert for whatever it is, clothes, soap, health insurance, whatever.
As they do.
It's always mixed race families. They can propagandize all they like for that. For a while, they'll take the low hanging fruit. The people who aren't ethnically conscious at all will fall for that. But plenty of people are ethnically conscious. Ethnic consciousness is rising, especially, as you know, amongst young people. So there'll come a point when they can throw all the propaganda they want at it. We're probably already at that, actually. It's become so ridiculous now. Everybody knows it, and it's not having any effect. Propaganda like that only works if it's subtle, and it's not subtle anymore. So it's spent. So there'll be a significant proportion of our people who simply will not mix, and they'll tend to create institutions. They're already there. Someone who doubts this can't say, "Oh, the state would stop it." The only way you could stop people self-segregating into communities where their kids only meet, kids like them actually, would be, for instance, to abolish music. Because even in the days when the BNP was really thoroughly white, honestly, I'm a great fan of folk music. But folk music, or for that matter, apart from the Chinese, classical music, folk music and classical music, they're kryptonite to all the other peoples of the world. They won't go near them. I've been to folk concerts, which are
the Chinese love it. The Chinese love that.
Yeah, the folk concerts are far more ethnically white than BNP meetings used to be.
But usually they're lefties. You go to folk concerts, they're often like Antifa.
They're usually lefties, but they're completely segregated by race. There's a fair degree of the same with country and Western music in America. And obviously, there's people right at the top trying to use country and Western now in the same way that they've used football as a way of pushing people towards multiculturalism and so on. But if they do that, you'll get a sort of purist version will come up. And there's nothing, the most repressive state in the world can't stop people going to the music of their choice. And therefore, our people who want to stay our people, that's the sort of thing they'll gravitate to. So you don't think, in the end, you might end up with a Brazil, but the shading of Brazil comes as a direct result of the conquistadors at the very beginning, going there without women and mating with the locals and then bringing in slaves and doing the same thing. The situation in European countries is so totally different that while some people will end up in the melting pot, there'll always be a bloc who won't. And that's where our future lies.
Yeah. Mr. Rosburn said, what's your favorite folk band? Do you have one off the top of your head or
no? Favorite folk bands? They're almost not a folk band, actually. They're a band called Show of Hands, who are sort of patriotic socialists. Well, they're defunct now. They do some absolutely, they're the West of England band. They do some traditional folk stuff and also their own takes on it. And they're not preachy with their left wingery. I think they're absolutely fantastic because personally, I like to. I'll just, as long as there's a few beers and a willing audience, I can sing till dawn. Unaccompanied. That's it.
What do you sing?
I know hundreds of songs.
Okay.
My voice isn't particularly good. I can't play.
We must get you doing this sometime.
but I can remember songs. So personally, I like really raw English and Irish folk music, the really raw stuff. But you can't expect normal people to listen to that. Certainly not all night. Yeah. So if someone wants an introduction to, so Peter Bellamy was a fantastic raw English folk singer. His father was one of Mosley's right-hand men.
Was he? I didn't know that.
Absolutely. Yeah, he was. And Bellamy, in the end, was frozen out by the left in folk music because he believed in God. He insisted on singing Kipling songs, Kipling poems he set to music. And he refused to go along with the idea that there was something wrong with Britain and so on. He couldn't get gigs. In the end, he committed suicide because he simply couldn't get any gigs anymore. And it was his life.
That's why.
So I think Bellamy's fantastic. And I know a number of his songs, and they're great. But I would not recommend it to anyone who was thinking about getting into folk music. They start with Peter Bellamy because he used to say, I bleat.
I liked his voice. I liked his voice a lot.
But if you're new to folk music, Guy Hell is raw. It's too raw. Yeah. So as a sort of an entry drug to folk music, try Show of Hands, and then head towards Peter Bellamy.
There was a new band, English band. I don't know if I don't follow that much of it, but there was one. What was the song? They had a really good song, Copperhead Alley or something like that. Oh, I can't remember the name of the band. They were good. It was a girl singing with a real. I don't even know. Was it Cockney accent?
Red Hot Chili Peppers.
What?
Red Hot Chili Peppers.
The American band. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. Didn't they do that song?
No. Copperhead Alley. And this is definitely an English folk song. It was definitely an
English folk song. No, I don't know that then. Oh, Ali, as in a girl's name. Yeah. No, I don't.
It was a girl's.
Yes. What I can say.
Copperhead Alley is the name of the band, and I've got it all. Right, I don't remember. The wife told me.
What I can tell you, since you're interested in folk music, then, so is a bit of an aside that one of the unintended consequences of my career. So the creation of the boosting of Nigel Farage by the BBC, hence Brexit, hence now the chaos of the two-party system being broken, largely came down to the British National Party being there to break the mould, force these issues to be discussed, and force the BBC to back Nigel Farage. So that's a huge unintended consequence. Another one, so the other part of my career, just unexpected, was when we started using folk music, English folk music, in the British National Party. Various leftist folk musicians were horrified by this. Billy Bragg, one, for instance. They were horrified by this. Jonathan Bowden, another one. John Bowden, not Bowden, Bowden. They were so horrified by the idea that the BNP was going to muscle in on what they thought was their territory, that they got all the old hands together and they got all their contacts of the BBC, and they created Folk Against Fascism, and the BBC also promoted this on quite a significant scale. So all of a sudden, instead of regarding English folk music as part of the beast, part of something really bad, they decided to promote it under the control of the left. And it created quite an upsurge in interest in folk music amongst young people in Britain, just because they now heard it. And quite a few of these bands that are out there now, and it's really quite a big folk revival in Britain going on. Quite a few of them, if you trace back to where they came from, who was influencing, it all comes out of Folk Against Fascism. And I don't care why our kids, or kids out there, middle-class kids, I don't care why they're singing English folk songs and sea shanties rather than rap music. It's just the fact they're singing our songs will do me.
Yeah. No, it's definitely a bonus. Yeah. I know it's weird that there's so many are lefty in here as well, but it's definitely still good and great. So let me just ask you before I let you go, because I know you didn't want to go much more than an hour. What were my questions? Oh, so okay. First of all, really quick, you mentioned like did you ever meet Farage? Did you ever have any? So
the only time
there's no chance he's like hiding his. There's no chance he's hiding his power levels, and he's a different kind of character than we see.
No. In the Parliament, if we were passed in a corridor and so on, he's got his gaggle of people around him. I might have an assistant, whatever. But he would look. He'd pretend I didn't exist. No recognition of me whatsoever. And one day I was up in a really obscure floor of this rabbit warren of the Parliament in Strasbourg. It's the Tower of Babel building.
Yeah.
And I was up there, really obscure, about the 8th floor. I got in a lift, and Farage was in the lift alone, and he was absolutely horrified. He turned white. He said, "Oh, hello, Nick." I said, "Hello, Nigel." And he got out. Then the lifts. So he pressed the button to stop the lift at the next floor, and got out at this purely bureaucrat's floor where he had no reason to be whatsoever, and disappeared. So that's the only time Nigel Farage has spoken.
You didn't try to talk to him. You should have just made him talk somehow. Listen, Farage.
Had he stayed to the bottom, I'd have forced him to have a conversation. But no, he
that's
wasn't
funny.
to be seen coming out of the lift in one of the floors where there's actually political people. For him to be seen coming out of a lift with me would raise some really serious questions. Well, they could have just said, he is protected. And here's an example of how protected he is. We set him in the quite early days when it was still UKIP. This would have been about 2004, I guess, when it came to European elections, especially, they were the big challenge for us. And so we hit on this plan to destroy Farage, or give him a real bloody nose, by giving the BBC, who we read the BBC at this stage as being, they hate us enormously, but they hate Farage as well. So we set up a meeting. One of our people was actually working at the UKIP headquarters, and they knew when Farage was going to be there and when he was leaving, and that he'd be going through Liverpool Street Station. So we got a man of ours. It's not a secret, so his name was Tony Lacombe, and he'd been in prison years before under Tyndall for trying to blow up a left-wing bookshop. And the bomb had gone off in his car and so on. He'd been somewhat injured. It was a rather inefficient, prank almost. But anyway, he'd gone to prison for this. He'd come out. Tyndall had kept him in the party, and I did as well, on the basis that he's done his time. He said, he goes around telling youngsters, don't go down that road. There's serious political work to do. So I kept him in the party. So anyway, we arranged, when we knew Farage was going to be there, Tony was waiting on the crowded platform of Liverpool Street Station, and we had a cameraman as well. And he walked up to Nigel and said, "Excuse me, mate, you got the time?" So Nigel looks at his watch and gives him the time. And we got these rapid shot bursts. So we got pictures of Nigel Farage speaking to Tony the Bomber Lacombe. And we passed those to the press, and they never used it.
Oh.
Which shows you just how much, even then, that was years before they really started promoting Farage.
That he was a made man.
Even then, he was, they knew in the end he's their man, not our man.
Yeah.
Nothing's.
So it's all about him. He's just an ego politician guy. It's just him and his glory paths of whatever.
I think so. And he hates, as a personal grudge, he's a stockbroker. He's a money man. And some of the early EU regulations ruined his business. And he swore eternal vengeance on the EU. I did something slightly similar. When I was about 12 or 13, the impact of us joining what became the European Union was then the common market. I lived in East Anglia at the time, the east side, in a rural area. And it was heaven for young lads. It was small fields, trees, hedges, and especially ponds. There was one pond we were especially fond of. It was alive with little roach. You could catch 100 fish a day with put the back and so on. Sitting in a short session. It was wonderful for a group of 9-year-old boys. And I came on it one day. I was 12 or 13, and the farmers were ripping out all the hedges, filling in all the ponds, destroying everything, because they were being paid now by this new common market policy to grow vast amounts more food. It was all subsidies, and they were getting money for every pond they filled in, every tree they cut down, every hedge they ripped out. And I stood in tears at the wreckage of this boyhood heaven. Where
it sounds like the Ted Kaczynski story.
Yes. So I didn't become a mad bomber, but I did swear in my childish way that somehow one day I'd find a way of taking revenge for this. And like I said, I'm part of the reason that we got a Brexit, which, although it was flawed, we didn't really get what we voted for. It made an
Yeah.
awful mess of the European Union. So I fulfilled my childhood vow.
Yeah. Well, you did. You definitely did good, and you've definitely been. I mean, even this realist view about where we are and what we do. Like, so you view these remigration people as just an absolute scourge, then, like that they're actually not just a silly waste of time.
I understand where they're coming from. I understand it because when I was campaigning for repatriation, it was the same thing with the same policies.
Yeah.
So I don't blame them for it.
No.
There's some of the older, wiser ones, or the ones particularly the ones who are making an absolute fortune with huge reach on monetized social media, and they're making 40,000-50,000 a month out of this, and it's just business. It's just business.
Yeah,
and if they put out the truth, people they thrive on anger and hatred, and the idea if someone can by pressing like or by pressing forward, if they can think I've done my bit today, it's basically social media like that. Or remigration, it's the prophylactic of revolution. It's a rubber johnny on the cock. That's it. It stops anything proper happening, I'm afraid. So when people are making money out of it, I detest that. Absolutely detest it. But the people who just swallow it, it's no matter. Very few people so far have stood up and said, look, it's a great idea. It's not going to work. You've got to be realistic. And one of the reasons people don't do it is because you get, a lot of people will shoot you down for it.
Yeah, they get angry. That's the thing. People get when you say this isn't good enough, and it's not. They get angry. They're so angry. I guess they're hopeful. They're invested. They're hopeful.
Yes, yeah. But that in the end, they'll all come to see the people who accept it and understand it are right, and then they'll think, oh, if only we'd started this work 20 years ago, how much better a position we'd be in now. So that's the shame. But I don't think it'll last that long. It won't last in Britain, I don't think, much beyond the next general election, really, not amongst nationalists, because they'll see that even if Farage and co win, nothing's going to change. They'll see the hardline ones with the remigration policies don't get anywhere at all. It'll be not that much easier for them to do the maths and understand we've got to do something different. And also, as a personal blame, at the end of 2014, when I really saw this, and even before the European election, when we lost our seats in the European Parliament, I was saying to the people at the head of the BNP, look, for us, the electoral road is finished, because they're going to UKIP and whatever comes after it and so on. It's now so strong we can't stand against this. They're going to come to power. They're going to take all the protest votes. All we get out of this for the next 15, 20 years is losing and demoralization. So organizationally, apart from anything else, we had to find other things. So I was suggesting sort of towards community politics. We'd had some really interesting community politics experiments, things like instead of political stalls in marketplaces and high streets, we were experimenting with mobile food stalls, things like this. So we were already starting it, and there were some people in the party ready for it, but the majority of the leadership weren't. The leadership cadre weren't ready for it in 2014, and basically thought Nick's going somewhat mad. And then the treasurer, in order to get hold of all the wills that was in the party's hands, basically organised a coup, and they got rid of me. So it's partly my fault. If I'd been tougher and prepared to have yet another party civil war, then I'd have got rid of them. But it would have been a party which was wrecked, but it could have been rebuilt on the new model. And probably I should have done that instead of allowing myself to be expelled on the basis that this thing was now a lie.
Why, if you felt it was hopeless politically, why would you?
Because it was hopeless as a party political thing. And yes, to convert, if the vast majority of the top had understood and was willing to come with me, I would undoubtedly have kept it as it was, and we would have migrated it over from being a political party into being a British indigenous civil rights movement and community building thing. And that could have been done. As it was, it would have taken a civil war within the party, which would have left it in absolute ruins. And I didn't really have the stomach for it because I was knackered.
What was the big? Can I ask what was the big divide? What was the big divide there? What were they accusing you of?
The big divide was the people who didn't like that, but the actual crux of it was that about 9 months before the European elections of 2014, we'd had a couple of bequests to the party. Old people who died, having left things in their house in one case, decent sum of money to the party in another. And the treasurer and I sat down, and we worked out a plan to really push to collect wills. So we really pushed quite hard. We produced a glossy pamphlet and so on about basically why you should remember the BNP in your will. And he came to me about 6 weeks before the election, and while we were discussing obviously the campaign, but he got this folder like this. He said, "You know what's in here?" "What's in there?" He said, "It's wills, copies of wills." He had a folder after less than a year of working on this. He got a folder containing wills worth £10 million.
Oh,
Now, obviously, that's not money in the bank, but it's money that's
Yeah.
coming over the next 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years. And it was,
That's a
it was
lot.
going up. So I
Yeah.
said to him, "Clive, this is fantastic. It's really beyond our wildest dreams. There's a bit of there is a problem in this, in that because we didn't know where this was going. When we set it up, we had you as you're the treasurer, the party's national treasurer, and we also had you as executor. So name Clive Jefferson as your executor." I said, "This looks bad." I said, "I know you're not going to run off with the money, but as the treasurer and the man controlling the post office box where the will notifications come in, and as the executor, you're in a position you could steal that money, and so you're going to get accused of that. We've got to sort this out." And he looked at me and he said, and he was a criminal. He was a career criminal before. He had a terrible accident, and so he lost his career criminal empire, and then he got involved in politics. But his skill in political campaigning. There was about 3 people who literally got me elected in the European Parliament, and he was one of them. Right. He was really, really skilled. So I trusted him. I thought his criminality was from his youth, was behind him. But when I said we've got to sort this out, he's looked and he said, "Oh, don't worry, Nick. We'll sort this out after the election. 6 weeks' time." Oh, fair enough. It's okay. Of course, what I meant by sorting it out, transparency and so on, wasn't what he meant by sorting it out. What he meant by sorting it out was getting rid of me. And so then there was this, which I didn't understand. So there was this vicious push by him to lie to people, to bribe people, to blackmail people into quietly opposing me. So I was outmaneuvered and got rid of. First factional fight I'd ever lost. But again,
he got all the money in
years warfare, lawfare and trouble against us from the outside. And all the trouble with infiltrators inside and all the rest of it, and just the grind of running of any organisation. I was knackered, so I wasn't top form. Sorry to butt in over you there, but I wanted to get that across. No problem. I do regret that, and we'd be in a better position if I hadn't made that mistake. But we are where we are.
So did he get that 10 million in the end? Did he make off with it?
No, he paid off. He's still there. He's still in charge of the BNP, which is now deregistered. It still just about exists. Occasionally pretends to be a political party. He's had hundreds of thousands. Probably, I've heard an estimate of up to 2 million. I don't know if that's true. But no, a lot of the people change their wills. So instead of it being left to the BNP, it's left to the Cat Protection League or whatever.
Right.
So it's just gone somewhere else. Some of them haven't even died, but most of it's been changed. But no, he did very well out of it. He went from living in a council house in a fairly grotty place to a big house he was able to buy through Country Life, I think it was, the magazine. So he's done all right. But I don't know about his conscience, and I'm sure as hell sure that he won't benefit in the next life.
Well, criminal types, their conscience, they're not well known for their conscience, are they?
They're not well known for their conscience.
It's not dissimilar to what happened here with the National Party. There was really a big fuss over the treasury and the...
Yes, I remember that. And the strange story of the National Party gold and so on.
Yeah. But I mean, that was a whole different thing and then they split because the original guy became a little too based, many say.
Yes, indeed.
Yes, you know the whole thing. I don't have to.
I know the whole thing. I met those involved personally, and so on. We tried
that's
to
the other thing I would say. When you were talking about being in the north, you were talking about meeting the loyalists and all that. Did you ever meet up with the other side?
Oh yes, absolutely so. Absolutely so. Met up with the farmer man who did Justin and got rid of Justin and so
on. What's his name? Yeah.
Reynolds. Yeah, that's it. Reynolds met with them and several of their sort of young activist organizer types, and gave them advice. This is me and my main propaganda and social media chap and so on. We gave them all sorts of advice and offered to help them advance. We took them through things like, really, what do the Irish want? What do the Irish need? What do you need? So the same thing that Jim had done with me early on was to say, look, you want to get votes. This was Britain in 2014, sorry, 2009. Where are your votes coming from? So we were thinking of well, we need to run a campaign aimed at young people. They're the ones we need to persuade. So he came in and said, look, demographically, there's not many of them. He said, are they your voters? So we said, well, when someone really sits you down and makes you think about it, and he quite brutally so, he said, who are your voters? So out of our sort of collective of 10 or 12 of us who were there to work out the party's plan of campaign, we said after a few minutes discussing and so on, well, basically it's the average, the typical is probably 55, 56-year-old white van man. That's our voter. So he said, right, so what are his experiences and so on? What does he think about when he thinks of loving Britain and so on? So out of a group which includes basically hardcore Hitlerite types, I'm not in that bracket, but out of a group which includes those, after it's dragged out of them after a bit, look, what they're really into actually is, the first thing they remember probably is Britain winning the World Cup in 1966 and perhaps Churchill's funeral at the time. That's it.
Right.
That formed them. They remember playing at being Spitfires in the in the school playground. That's their formative years. If you want to persuade them that they can vote for you, you've got to give them that. So we ran the campaign. It was I was doing the V sign, which the party purists said, oh, Churchill did that. He was bought and paid for by the Zionists and the Jewish bankers and so on. It's treason, it's treachery, all sorts of trouble with those people. We said, look, we need to win. And this is what we need to do, but to persuade the British people that all the mass media stuff about us being Nazis, lunatics, etc., it's not true. We're decent British patriots. You can vote for us on that basis. So we did this. And it worked. Got us elected. And all sorts of things that followed from it. So when we met with Justin and the other chap and the others, we were saying, look, to be an Irish nationalist party, what have you got to have? So it's got to be green, and it's got to be a harp, stuff like this. And they call it, you've probably know the phrase, they call it paddy whackery. If you're a sort of an intellectual type, proper hardline nationalist in Ireland, you think that stuff which involves Irish folk music in the background and green and that sort of thing, they called it paddy whackery. Now I think they've grown out of that a bit because of all the grassroots protests. The grassroots aren't interested in anything other than basic Irish identity, paddy whackery. So you see these fantastic processions they have now, and when they've had the quite militant demonstrations against the invasion of Ireland. And I'm absolutely for the right of the Irish people to control their own destiny, including getting rid of the Brits in the first place from most of the island of Ireland. We had no business being there. Simple as that. So I'm not against Irish republicanism, but they're against my tribe in a bit of Northern Ireland. But that we can argue, we can go back to killing each other over that when we've sorted out the other problems. But when those grassroots demos took off, well, now all you've got is a sea of tricolour flags, or sometimes the Green Irish Republic flag and so on. And so I think they might have realised that paddy whackery is the way to go. But
the original Irish flag is beautiful. The green flag with the harp is so beautiful.
It's a lovely flag, isn't it? Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yes.
It's so nice.
Yeah, it really is. It's a great flag. Yeah.
But so I don't want to keep you too long. I do have just two more questions, if you don't mind. One should be quick. Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned several times Rupert Lowe, and I follow him, and I've tried to communicate with him on Twitter. He doesn't really respond to me. I do believe. I swear. Being egotistical, thinking I've influenced him somehow, but I've mentioned I've responded. Maybe I'm being silly. I shouldn't even say that. Anyways, it doesn't matter. But you seem to think positively of him, and there's potential in him. Am I right? What do you think?
I think there's potential. So he's not all the bought and paid for Zionist funded Clash of Civilizations kind of jihad people. They'll all talk, for instance, about halal ritual slaughter. It's actually shocking. It's terrible. It's wicked. It's got to be stopped. It's brutal. Absolutely true. As a matter of fact, if you eat factory reared pork, I don't believe you've got any right to criticize other people for how they kill animals, because that's really barbaric. But that's rather by the by. But you certainly don't have any right to criticize halal ritual slaughter without talking about kosher ritual slaughter, which is actually worse, and it's also financed because the hindquarters of all the animals end up unlabeled in our food chain. So we automatically subsidize it because they can't eat the hindquarters. It's impure. So every sheep, every cow, we get more than half the meat, although it's been kosher slaughter. So it's even worse. And all the rest of them won't mention it. Rupert Lowe, questioning about this very rapidly, said, "Yeah, I'm against kosher ritual slaughter as well." So he's
I remember that.
He's daft on the Israel-Palestine thing. Of course. But that's his age, his class, his political background. You wouldn't expect him to know anything else. And overall, in terms of what he could do, it doesn't matter what his opinion of Israel and Palestine is, because there's nothing he, you, or I are actually going to do that makes any damn difference, unfortunately. So you can take a stand, as I've done. It's why I lost my Twitter account. It's why I'm being persecuted now and facing prison yet again. You can take a stand.
Are you facing prison?
Yeah, campaign against anti-Semitism. I've got a private race act prosecution against me. They've got a long way to go before they can make it stick. But so you can stand up against it, or you might not. It doesn't really matter. What Rupert Lowe could do, if he would only stop, he's saying we're going to put all this money into elections when there's reform between him and being a potential government. When reform cock up, there's Ben Habib in advance, which is far better known and far stronger than Rupert Lowe, with his as yet unformed sort of political party, although about 30,000 members. So he's got to wait until reform cock up and disappear, and advance cock up and disappear, and then you might have time for Rupert Lowe. And any hardline nationalist parties got to wait for Rupert Lowe. If he's still alive in 20 years' time, when his time would come, they've got to wait for him to cock up. So it's ridiculous. So what Lowe should do, if Lowe would switch from saying, we've got these problems and the solution is that you've got to join me and we fight elections. If he was to switch to say, we've got these problems and the other parties of the right are doing the election route, we've got work to do fighting for indigenous rights. For instance, you can't have a charity in England for an English cause. It's not permitted. It's against the law. Now, that's absolutely untenable if there was a sensible civil rights campaign for that. And certainly if you've got a reform government or even a large reform bloc in Parliament, and one MP brings that in as a private member's bill, all the rest will have to vote for it. The Tories would have to vote for it. Even some of the Labour Party would have to vote for it, because to vote against something, to vote to say only the English cannot have a charity, is so monstrous it couldn't happen. So if Lowe were to say, we're going to become a civil rights organisation and a community organisation base, so we pool ideas, we pool resources, we help people get started, we work like the Muslims do, we work like the Jews do, supporting their communities and supporting their local businesses and so on. If Lowe were to do that, he could become a really important figure in the nationalist future of this country, because he's got the money, he's got the contacts, he's got the reach, and he's got the people. I haven't. Lowe could do this. I don't care whether, I don't want to be on his board. If he just pick up these ideas or work them out for himself. This isn't actual rocket science, So
he's very close. He's very close. Yeah, if he would even so much as watch this video, or if he could talk to him.
Sure. Well, I'm putting
it would save him 10 years. It'd save him 20 years.
It would. So I'm putting these ideas across piece by piece as amongst my Substack writings. I'm on Substack, by the way, Nick Griffin Beyond the Pale. It's a great app. If you haven't got it, it's free. Download it. Really good. So I'm using Substack as a discipline. Not everything I write by any means is for a future book, but I'm working chapter by chapter on a book with a working title, What is to be Done, which is it's precisely about why some things won't work and what we need to be doing and how much good they can do. Once I've got the book, I shall send Rupert Lowe a copy personally.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as far as I can see, you're the one talking 100% realism, that, being realistic. I don't like any kind of evasive bullshit when people are kidding themselves, as they say, wish in one hand, shit in the other. See what fills up first. That's
not a phrase I've heard before. Is that a Canadian phrase?
I mean, it's an American phrase. Yeah. Wish in one hand, shit in the other. See which fills up first is the phrase.
Very good.
It's perfect. It's like, wish all you like. That sounds great.
Yeah.
But okay, my final question for you, and it's a bit of a doozy, but you don't have to. I mean, make it as quick as you feel you want to. Is just in terms of what's going on in the world with the whole business with America and Russia and the two sides of the world as we speak. what do you, and this whole business with Trump and Greenland, and not, I'm not trying to make a hugely broad question, but just like, where do you stand on all that? And this talk now of, possibly getting the Americans leaving NATO.
Well,
like me personally, let me just say, when I hear this talk and I hear like everything I see on Twitter, they're all saying, or X, they're like, okay, they're making threats like, we'll just leave NATO and fuck you Europeans. But I personally just think, like, fine, forget NATO, take all your bases out of Europe and go home. Do you agree? Would you agree that's the best thing, or what?
Yeah, I do. Back in 1983, 84, when we first, myself and other young radicals, had taken over the National Front, I organised the first and the only nationalist demonstrations in Britain, in England, against American bases. We marched and protested in Bury St Edmunds and East Anglia against the Lake and Heath bases. We marched to the bases there with a huge banner. No to Washington, no to Moscow, armed neutrality now. And that was always the proper nationalist position, was that this was basically an American military occupation of Europe, is also an economic occupation and particularly a cultural occupation, and it's absolutely poisonous, and we're against it. So I've always been in that position. So if this leads to a breakup of NATO, absolutely fantastic. As to what's going on, obviously all the hardline nationalists, when talking about Venezuela, it's all according to them because it's the Zionist lobby wanting to use Trump to get rid of Maduro because he was pro-Palestinian and so on. Clearly the Zionist lobby had a role in this and we're delighted. But I think that overall, I wrote again a thing on Substack about this very recently. I think overall the key thing is that the Venezuelans were they created a cryptocurrency called the Petro, which was backed by oil, and they were going to be selling and encouraging other people to buy and sell oil in their crypto dollar currency rather than in dollars. Now, destroying the petrodollar recycling mechanism, and not long after that, destroying the status of the dollar as the global reserve currency, would utterly destroy the financial base of the whole American system. Because, as you know, America is industrially drastically hollowed out. Trump's trying to reverse it, but it's drastically hollowed out. Without the petrodollar operation and the Federal Reserve printing dollars, which the rest of the world buys in real goods, America will be finished as a coherent state. Certainly couldn't afford to have a military power overseas. So, to an extent, did Trump actually have any choice there? Yes, the Zionists were pushing for this, but overall, it sort of makes sense for the Americans. It's a betrayal, obviously, of what the Americans wanted and thought were voting for. And yes, he did have a choice. He could say, you know what, we're going to destroy the Federal Reserve. We're going to turn this into a properly run country, and we're going to become a proper, important, major power. But that's it. We abandoned trying to rule the world, police the world, and we sort out the financial system. And thanks, we can run America properly. That would have been the nationalist position. Trump's not a nationalist. He's a capitalist. He's there for the capitalists. He's not going to do that. He's not going to take on the Federal Reserve, the international banking system, etc., etc. So within the confines he's in, the confines of his brain and what he could possibly do without definitely being shot, actually propping up the dollar is necessary. Then you come to the Greenland thing. As far as I know, not even a polar bear or a drunken Inuit has come out in support of Palestine. So there's no Zionist operation thing that I can see there. So very clearly, it's about rare earth minerals. Very clearly, because China controls 95% basically of the world's rare earth minerals. The people running America, the deep state, which has done basically a deal with this crazed loose cannon, who came up with some good things, but mainly promises, that they clearly have decided they are going to have to confront China, not totally militarily, but in every way. That China is the new hegemonic power which can challenge America, and they're quite clear about it. No one's allowed to do that. And they must have looked at China and realized that we cannot confront China. We can't even compete with China industrially, while they have 95% of the rare earth minerals. We have to get them, and they happen to be in Greenland in very large quantities. How much it's practical to get them out? If they're under a mile of ice, can they get them out? Probably, actually. If they really have to, and the ones around the coast they can get. So, in fact, everything that's known about the rare earth minerals in Greenland from the maps I've seen, they're all around the edge because that's where there isn't any ice. Or there's not that much ice. So again, from a purely capitalistic American point of view, I think it makes sense. And here's the critical thing of this is that most Europeans, Brits included, think that basically sort of America's agnostic about us or rather likes us. Possibly Trump does in his rather crazed, confused, ex-Scots-Irish way. Possibly he does.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Clearly, he was very, very flattered to get the invitation from the king and so on. So perhaps he's actually into those things. But America, the American deep state, is not on our side. They pushed. Other people pushed Europe into the First World War, but they did. And then they ruthlessly used the First World War as a way of destroying half the empires of Europe. You know, the Germans, the Austrians, the Russians, and the Turks. And then they used the Second World War, which they were amongst the people who pushed for that. They used the Second World War to destroy the remaining European empires, France, Belgium, and Britain. So they're against us. And they're using the Ukraine war. So, you know, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline.
They started.
Was very obviously done by the CIA or by CIA puppets if they're Ukrainians. That wasn't an attack on Russia. The same as sanctions aren't an attack on Russia. Sanctions in the Nord Stream were an attack on Germany. They're an attack on the European Union, because you can only prop up the dollar in once you have a multipolar world where China and Asia has broken off and is doing its thing, and they can't beat China. So they're going to have a shrunken world which America can dominate. And that shrunken world is mainly made up of Europe. So to dominate Europe completely, they need to wreck it. And then they can go in with a huge new reconstruction program, as they did at the end of the Second World War, and take basically all our assets in exchange for sorting the mess out. And that's it. So they want Europe ruined. And so that, I think, is why Trump doesn't actually give a damn about this. You build this strong America, and if you look at, have you come across the technate idea? I only came across this the other day. What
is it?
The technate. It's from the technology movement, which was huge in Canada, but also in America. They had hundreds of thousands of members, and one of the leading members of this party between the wars, and it produced a map, and the map's uncanny. Basically, everything's red from Venezuela right the way through Mexico. Obviously,
and the other side's blue, is it? I did see this, maybe.
Canada and Greenland, it's all red. And one of the main men of the pushing this technate idea, this technical giant United States of America, was Elon Musk's grandfather. Honestly, really, really, really interesting. So I think that is where the world is going. The old unipolar world is gone. The people running the American deep state know that. So they're shoring up their control over the Western Hemisphere, and they're screwing up Europe so that it has so that the pound sterling and the euro are not a serious competitor to the dollar, but we remain in their economic sphere and so on. And one more thing, just to actually finish off on this, takes us right back to demographics. Very clearly, Trump was elected, then in the end re-elected, largely on the basis he's going to rebuild American industry. And with the tariffs that he's put in, it's actually having that effect to a degree.
Yeah,
I think this isn't just Trump. This is a big section of the American deep state. When they realized they couldn't fight Russia and China, try and split them up now, but they're going to have to confront China. They can't do that when they've outsourced all their industry to China. So they are determined to rebuild American industry. Not for the benefit of the American people, really. It's for the big corporations and for American power and American financial power. So they've got to do that. So you have tariffs to provide the safe background. You drill, baby, to provide the cheap energy. And you say, well, because these tariffs are so high, you start rebuilding your industrial base. So you can do all of that. But even if you have robots can't consume. There's one more thing missing to rebuild the economic structure of America so it doesn't actually just collapse under the weight of its own chaos. You need people. You need young people, because the demographics of white America are almost they're as bad as ours are. So where do they get these people from? There's no point getting Colombians or Africans or Hindus or whatever. One, they don't actually help running a society. And two, it's politically impossible, because ordinary white America is still there and they simply won't accept it. unless you completely do away with democracy and rule them under, with clubs and boots and guns, you couldn't do it. There's only one group of people in the world who could save America demographically. And that's young white Europeans, Brits and Irish. We're the only people, because you could go there, you could have 30 million of our younger people go to America, and the ordinary Americans wouldn't mind, because we're not going to go and rape their daughters and eat their dogs and all the rest of it. They really wouldn't mind about it. But how do you persuade? So America's already, like I said earlier on, America's the biggest single destination for all the Brits leaving Britain.
Right.
Already. If America were to open its door, and bear in mind, Elon Musk absolutely gets demographics completely, and he clearly has an influence. If America were to open its door, millions of Europeans and Brits would go there, and they could have their pick and choice. No one over the age of 40. No one has got a criminal record if they want. Everyone's got to have a health test. They get the very best of ours, as indeed they did. But even that wouldn't be enough, because they probably get, 5 million, 10 million? They need 30, 40 million. I believe that the key way they're doing that is although when I started looking at this, all the people pushing for a civil war and for civil wars all over the West, they're all basically Zionist agents. There's more to it than that. You actually find people, when you really look, it's American deep state and their fellows in the upper echelons of the British military. Professor David Betts. Can't go into that now, but honestly, it's there. Again, there's articles about this on my Substack. These people are deliberately wanting to wreck Britain and Europe. And the other side of the coin, you can't have a civil war with one side. You've got to have the other. So everyone's saying all these undocumented foreign migrants, Merkel's children, all the rest of it, 1 million then alone, all pouring into Britain. And everyone looks at who's responsible for this? George Soros. It's them again. It's George Soros. It's not really, because George Soros, it's like the old days. The kings used to have the Jews as tax collectors. And the nobles used to have the Jews as tax collectors. And when the peasants got really angry, they went and slaughtered a few Jewish tax collectors. And they didn't slaughter the nobles or the king, which is what the problem they really needed to deal with if they wanted to sort their troubles out.
So you're saying America is more of a...
Yeah, everyone looks at George Soros and the Open Society Foundation, and they stop at that point. But if you look at some of the recent WikiLeaks and so on, absolutely crystal clear that it was already known. Soros has operated more or less as a front for the National Endowment for Democracy for more than 50 years. So it's not really his money, it's National Endowment for Democracy money. The National Endowment for Democracy is a CIA front. And they're the ones who've imported into Britain and Western Europe, and are still doing it, the people who would be the other side of a civil war if they managed to kick it off. And I'm now quite sure that that's what we're dealing with. This is what's happening, is America doing everything it possibly can to have total control over a shrunken American world.
Really? And they say that was
I love ordinary Americans. Bear in mind, one last thing from me before I go on and on.
Too.
I always do. That when I'm saying this, I'm not attacking Americans, because the first victims of Yankee imperialism and Yankee capitalism and Yankee finance, the southern states in the war between the states, and having established control over them, and then wiped out the Plains Indians, who were savages, really nasty people. But there you go. Having done that, they were the first victims. The southern states and the American Indians were the victims of Yankee imperialism before Europe became. So I'm all with the southern states, or any Yankee will just stand up and say, I just want America first, MAGA. For the people who voted for it and believed it, good on them. I've not got a problem with them. But Trump and co, they're at war with Europe.
Yes, so I can see there's a lot of logic in that for sure. And you touched on so many things, like even what you said at the end there about the Aboriginals in North America. Like I actually know, I grew up with some of these people. I'd still be friends with some of them, but even they would admit that their ancestors were cannibals, and they kept slaves and tortured them, and they don't even care. Like,
yes.
As in terms of, like, if you think it's harsh to call them savages, they almost call themselves that themselves. And even to this day, they'd be pretty savage. Some of the toughest guys I knew were the toughest man I ever met was half Austrian and half Salish, or one of these tribes from Canada or whatever.
Yes.
Jesus Christ, he was he was a tough man. A big scar down the one side of his head like a pirate. Like, I mean, you wouldn't want to mess with him.
Yeah. No,
But
indeed. I can
the
imagine.
other thing, also from being from Canada, just anecdotally, I'm not sure if you know this, but I'm sure you do. You seem to know everything else. Is that when you another thing with taking Greenland and the rare earth metals is that there's an incredible process of environmental destruction in
Yes.
processing those things, and the
Mhm.
lakes of acid. I've seen them in Canada, like not
I
far
have
from
read of
in British
that.
Columbia
Yes.
where I grew up.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a zinc smelter, and I remember driving through this town. Everything for miles around the town was black and dead, literally
Wow.
just black, dead trees.
Yeah.
Stink. The air
Mhm.
stinks. So that might be, if he wants to reindustrialize, that might be part of the reason for somewhere far off like Greenland as well. You know, they can do all
Yeah.
that shit there. Like in China, apparently they have these lakes of acid and shit. But
Wow.
that's all apart from everything else. And you know, you've answered every question in incredible detail and succinctly, and I'm very grateful for your knowledge.
Well,
And
thank you for some really interesting questions, actually, Brendan. Thanks ever so much. I've enjoyed it.
yeah, well, thank you, Nick. Excellent. I hope you best of luck with all your. You know, you said you have some stuff to deal with, and
Yep.
you know, best of luck with everything you're doing, and you're far ahead of your time.
Thank you very much.
Everybody
Cheers.
needs to listen to you. Anybody who wants to like get on top of things, I think you definitely have some very sage wisdom. Very sage wisdom.
Thank you very much.
A
Been a
realist,
pleasure.
a true
Good
realist.
to speak to you again. Cheerio. Good night.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks a lot. Bye, everybody. Bye. End stream.